Okay, here's our video today, Biology, Living Environments, Regions. And we're going to talk about the chemistry of life. And you might be asking, well, what does chemistry have to do with biology? Well, first of all, we're all made of what? What are we all made of besides cells? We're all made of matter, right? We all matter. And even though matter is only 5% of the universe, it's what matters to us. Excuse the pun. So, we're not going to talk about dark matter and dark energy, which make up most of the universe. We're just going to talk about matter because we're really dealing with biology. And specifically, we're all made of atoms. So, let's just get a clean page here. And we'll change the pen. So, again, we're all made of atoms. And of course, we are made of cells, which we will talk about. So, we have over 30 trillion cells in our body. It's a lot of cells. But we have more, we have over 30 or 40 trillion bacteria in us that are vital to us also. And we'll talk more about bacteria in other videos. We also have a lot of viruses in us. And some people think we may have, some scientists think we may have over 200 trillion viruses in us. But the atoms we have, and let's write it, we have an average person has over 7 octillion atoms. 7 octillion. You don't hear that word too often. So let's write it, right? Oh, here we have a million, here we have a billion, trillion, right? Imagine you had $7 trillion, quadrillion, quintillion, sextillion, septillion, and here it is, octillion. We have 7 octillion atoms in our body. So that's why we're talking about the chemistry of life. We are made of atoms. So let me bring up the periodic table. We're going to just talk briefly about the periodic table because we'll talk more about that when we talk about chemistry videos. But we're going to talk about the periodic table and a certain amount of elements that are vital for the human body. All right, and here's our table. So there are some specific, we should just go over basically how it's read. To read this, we have periods. That's where we get the periodic table from, as we just lost it. There we go, get it back. So we have periods, and periods are the rows. Periods are the rows. So the rows go left to right. Left to right. So here's one row. In the first row of the periodic table, we have, or the first period, we have hydrogen. And way over there in the noble gas, we have helium. That's the first row, or the first period. Now, let's say what a period is made up of. So a period, all it does is it tells you how many orbits or shells, there's a lot of words for this, or clouds, all the same thing, the element has, or energy levels. For example, if we took this first one over here, hydrogen has one orbit or one shell. If we're making here a Bohr diagram, Niels Bohr made this diagram up. And so what hydrogen has, it has one proton, not protein, has one proton, which is positive. And we'll use another color. And it has one electron, which is negative. That's all hydrogen has. But you see it has one orbit, one shell, one cloud. And of course, more people are calling it clouds nowadays, or energy levels. So it is in the first period. Now, helium also has one orbit. Helium has two protons. And we'll change the color for the neutrons. It has two neutrons, which are neutral. And it has two electrons, which are negative. There's our electrons. So you notice it has one shell, or orbit, or cloud, or energy level, so it's in the first period. So using that logic, what do you think lithium is? What would lithium be? How many clouds or orbits or shells does lithium have? Well, it has two because it's in the second period or the second row. And what about sodium? Sodium is in the third row. Now be careful if someone asks you how many rows, let's say, zinc has. Some students may say the first row because they don't see anything up here. But remember, you have to include, this is the first row, helium. This is the second row. This is the third row. So zinc would be in the fourth row or the fourth period. So from left to right, that's the periods or the rows. They tell you how many shells it has, or orbits, or clouds. Now, vertically, up and down, those are the groups. So let's clear this out. Clear that section out over there. And the groups are families. So the groups are vertical, and they are the families. They share certain characteristics. For example, right here, this group over here, these are the nobles. These are the noble gases. And the noble gases don't react because their shell is complete, which we will go over when we talk about chemistry. But for this video, you just need to understand the periodic table. The rows are left to right, those are the periods, and the groups or the columns are up and down, and they share certain characteristics. Okay, let's clear that section out over there. Now, for this video, we're really going to be concerned with organic compounds, and the elements involved in them are over here. These are the elements of life that we really need. We need our carbon. We're carbon-based life forms. We need our nitrogen, our oxygen. We need our phosphorus and our sulfur. So these four are very important for life. Of course, we need other elements, but these are the four main ones. And these will make, and I'm going to write it over here, these will make organic compounds. So first, let's talk about compounds, and then we'll talk about organic compounds. So compounds, very simply, they're two or more elements. Let's do a famous one. So here we have oxygen, and you know this one, and we have two hydrogen. And it forms this bond. And of course, we know this is H2O. It has two hydrogen, right, and one oxygen. This is a compound. It's a compound because it has two or more elements. Right? And we can make another one here. Let's see. We have make this one over here. Right? This is CO2. We have carbon and two oxygen, CO2. And they're both compounds. And in the next video, we'll talk about the different types of compounds there are. But for now, let's talk about these organic compounds. And you notice that right up there, let's get our pen going here. Try green. Carbon is the key. We're carbon-based life forms. Carbon-based life forms, right? Because carbon could bond better than any other element. It can bond with four other elements. Let's bring this up. And it is the second most abundant element in our body, oxygen being the first. So let's just draw a Bohr model of carbon. So we have our first shell here, and we have our second shell over there. Remember, carbon is in the second row, second period. And in the first shell, we have our two electrons. But carbon only has four in the outer shell. So if you remember, I said previously, you can fill up to 8 in the second shell. So carbon could fill in 4 more electrons. So it can bond better than any other element. That's why it's essential. And we call it organic. When you hear about organic and when you take organic chemistry, you'll know that we're talking about compounds that are made with carbon. Carbon is the main element in organic compounds. Remember that. So that's why carbon is essential to life. Well, so is oxygen and other things. But without carbon, life would not exist. In fact, a lot of astronomers think, astrophysicists, that life wouldn't exist anywhere in the universe without carbon. Okay, well, that's for another video. So let's look at some organic compounds. So here they are. Let's look at the first one, lipids. And of course, they're not in any order, but lipids are fats, right? These are the fats, these are the oils, and lipids are essential. They store energy, right, for the cells and cell membrane, and they carry messages. We have and by the way, the lipids are made of carbon, they're made of hydrogen, and they're made of oxygen. Then we have our carbohydrates. They provide energy. They store energy also, and they're made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen also. And then we have our proteins. Proteins are essential to help cells keep their shape. They make up muscles, they speed up chemical reactions, they carry messages and materials. They're essential, right? So if you think about enzymes and antibodies, that's proteins. And proteins, which are made in with RNA, messenger RNA, they will code for proteins, and we'll talk about that in other videos. But you have carbon, you have hydrogen, you have oxygen, you also have nitrogen, and you have sulfur to make up the proteins. And the nucleic acids like DNA and RNA, which I said before, are nucleic acids. DNA and RNA, messenger RNA, and other types of RNA, which we'll talk about, they're made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. So you notice that they're all made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and proteins and nucleic acids also have nitrogen and sulfur, and nucleic acids have that phosphorus. So you can see how important carbon is, because carbon could bond with 4 other elements, where hydrogen can only bond with 1 other, and oxygen can only bond with 2 others. So let's look at the human body for a minute. So you can see oxygen, 65% of the human body is made of oxygen. And of course, they're not just in the legs and hands here. This is just a diagram. It's showing a tear. And carbon, second most abundant, 18%, hydrogen, 10%, and nitrogen, 3%. So these are the essential elements, besides also sulfur and phosphorus, that make up the human body, that make up life. Right, and here's the water in the body. So in the next video, we will be talking more about compounds and complex carbohydrates. We'll talk more about carbohydrates in the next video. So we'll just end just showing here that, look at the percentage of water in our body. We have about, let's get our pen going back here. Where did our pen go, right? So in our body, and just as just an average, we have about 60% water. And remember, water is a compound. And here's that compound again, shaped like this. We have our oxygen and our hydrogen. That's a compound. That's H2O, like I said previously. So as you can see, the brain is 75% water. Our blood is 83% water. We are made of water. Very essential for us. So in the next video, I'm going to talk about the different types of compounds, and we're also going to talk more about the significance of carbon and get into complex carbohydrates. That's in the next video. All right, great job.